Hey guys, so in today's video, I want to talk about finding proof for the supernatural. How can we know definitively, beyond a shadow of a doubt, whether or not there's a God, whether or not there's an afterlife, or whether or not there's anything out there beyond this material world? Stay tuned. So I think in a lot of ways, we've matured as a culture, and I think that a lot of people out there have kind of outgrown this sort of juvenile debate over whether or not there's proof for God or proof for the afterlife. And you may be surprised to hear me say that, because I guess in some sense I find myself surrounded by people who have sort of graduated out of this. But for a lot of other people, this is still a major issue, and this really has less to do with whether or not there's proof for the afterlife or proof for the existence of God, and I think a lot more to do with what people don't understand about proof, right? This word proof is something that a lot of people throw around, and I don't really think they understand what it means. All proofs are not equivalent, and all proofs are not the same. The proof that convicts someone in a court of law is not the same as a mathematical proof, nor is it the same as the kind of evidence that would support a theory such as gravity or evolution. There are different levels of proofs, different kinds of proofs, and different proofs that hold a certain varying degree of authority. The most definitive or the most emphatic example of a proof, I think, is a mathematical proof. A mathematical proof is a proof wherein which one demonstrates their ideas. You've got everything you need right there in front of you on the page, and you can see beyond a shadow of a doubt that in fact this is true. And not just true, but inescapably true. No other possible idea is possible, that nothing else can exist within that space. In fact, I'm reminded of the former President Abraham Lincoln, who talked about studying Euclid, a mathematician, in order to understand how to be a better lawyer. You really got to understand the essence of what a proof really looks like. And Abraham Lincoln talked about how understanding maths made him into a better lawyer, because it enabled him to understand what a proof actually looks like, right? It's a series of steps, a series of observations that lead you to an inescapable conclusion. And if you observe a mathematical proof, it can be so thorough as to feel almost mind-numbingly ridiculous. You look at some of the axioms that Euclid establishes in his early works of the 13 elements, and he says things like, we have to assume that a line between 2 points is straight, or that, a perfectly round circle is equidistant from the center, things that are obviously true. But these are the simple axioms, the simple ideas that one has to build on in order to achieve an inescapable proof. Now, this is not the kind of proof that we can talk about when it comes to religion or spirituality, because religious experiences are by definition ethereal, and they're usually subjective. An individual will be taken on a vision, they'll journey into the spirit world, they'll see God or endure a near-death experience, and to everyone else standing in the room, all they may see is a body, someone lying on a medical bed, or perhaps someone laying comatose in an ayahuasca hut, right? That's all the objective environment sees, but subjectively, the individual is taken into another dimension, into an altered state of consciousness. And so this really leads us to a major priority when it comes to understanding religious experiences. Many atheists and skeptics, figures such as Richard Dawkins, right? They put forward this sort of idea that, we have no physical evidence, we have no physical proof, and therefore we should assume that all religious ideas are nonsense, that, the only reality is this objective material one. But these individuals really exclude themselves from an effective conversation on these issues because they're not generally willing to enter an altered state of consciousness.
Have you had any experience with psychedelics?
No.
No? Do you have any interest in that?
I've been offered to be accompanied on a trip by a very nice woman friend.
Yeah?
And I've never so far dared take her up on it.
How come?
And I think it's no surprise that he would. I mean, it's almost like asking someone, if you don't believe in my hypothesis, then please come with me and step inside the laboratory, right? You don't want to step in there if you know you're going to observe proofs that contradict your theory, right? And this is really the thing, right? When we talk about religion, when we talk about spirituality, one of the major issues is recognizing what it is that makes religion religion, what it is that makes spirituality. I recently saw a video by Religion for Breakfast where he asked the question, is Coca-Cola a religion? And the answer, I would argue, is definitively no, right? Coca-Cola is not a religion. And you might ask, well, why is that? And for a lot of people, for a lot of scholars and academics, this is actually a major issue. What is a religion? How do you define a religion? What makes something, a spiritual community versus any other kind of group? And I think that I can put forward a really compelling hypothesis or a really compelling argument to suggest that a religion is defined as a set of ideas that is fundamentally rooted in and based upon observations and experiences had during altered states of consciousness, whether that be through visions, dreams, or other kinds of experiences. Ultimately, religious ideas are rooted in the unconscious psyche. I think this is a fundamental idea and a fundamental thing we have to understand before we can hope to make sense out of religion. And so when you ask about questions concerning proof for the afterlife, ultimately what we have to do is we have to set up an empirical observation. We have to set up a situation in which an experiment, a certain set of experiences can be repeated, replicated in order to produce a predictable observation. And we can do that, absolutely. As a matter of fact, in Enlightened University, in our Lecture 3 series, I educate all of our students on how to employ various different kinds of religious methods for entering altered states of consciousness, and their final exam is to employ those methods in order to achieve a particular kind of experience, to see the proverbial tunnel that many people describe. It's well known and well attested, even within academic literature and psychology, that when an individual enters an altered state of consciousness, they will generally see this proverbial tunnel, this whirling vortex of colors or lights, geometric shapes. It can vary depending on the religious method in the individual, but everyone fairly consistently describes this kind of a tunnel vision experience. Of course, in the case of near-death experiences, people will journey through this tunnel and have a vision of the white light, which they describe as God. But if you look at shamanism and different traditions from around the world, you will hear shamans describe this tunnel as their means of entering the spirit world, their means of entering into this altered state of consciousness. And so we can make predictions. We can actually make predictions around what we would expect an individual to observe. And you may argue that has nothing to do with whether or not there's an actual spiritual world out there. It says just something about human neurology, and that is a legitimate argument. But I would argue in defense of this position that ultimately, when an individual enters an altered state of consciousness a sufficient number of times and makes a sufficient number of observations in these experiences, one is led inescapably and invariably to the conclusion that there is some other world out there. I think the thing that really seals the deal for this is if you have, for example, an experience of seeing an event in the future. I know this is something I've talked about at length on the channel, precognitive dreams. This is something you hear many different people describe. You'll also have the experience during an altered state of consciousness where you will seem to speak to some sentient being that knows things you don't know, or teaches you something you've never heard before, or you come back from this experience with a level of knowledge and understanding that you never would have had otherwise. This really leads you to a conclusion or to a compelling position that this is something else, that this is not just something cooked up inside your head, but that you are in fact making contact with some other reality, some higher dimension, if you will.
Came in contact with the only way I can describe it is like an external intelligence. I say it's external because it seems so outside of yourself. And like,
And I think that when an individual is willing to explore altered states of consciousness and to go into these experiences with an open mind, looking to observe and looking to assess how real these things really are, you really do come away with a strong and compelling sense of conviction. You're not basing your religious beliefs and spiritual values on, what some guy behind a pulpit says. Ultimately, you're rooting your religious beliefs in what you definitively know to be real because you've observed it. This is really the foundations of science, right? That ultimately, if we want to believe something, if we want to know something to be true, we have to be able to put it to a test and make a predictable observation. I know in the case of Albert Einstein, one of the favorite examples I have is when he presented the theory of relativity, many academics thought it was crazy. And if you really have, for the very first time, heard relativity explained, it is crazy. The idea that the faster you move through space, the slower you move through time is by no means intuitive, and it seems to introduce all kinds of illogical oxymorons. And so, when Albert Einstein first presented this, he had to make a prediction. And he specifically predicted that during a solar eclipse, the positions of stars along the side of the sun would be changed, right, by the gravity, the curvature of the gravity caused by the mass of the sun. And this is, in fact, what scientists did observe. And so this really, in some sense, proved the Einsteinian theory of relativity. But sometimes you will hear people say that, if something is a theory, that means it hasn't been proven. And you know what? That is technically right. For example, creationists will often point out and say that the theory of evolution is just that, only a theory. But again, this is where we really have to understand what a proof really represents, because to prove the theory of evolution or to prove the Einsteinian theory of relativity, you would have to observe all possible predictions under all possible conditions and exclude any other possibility. And we know we simply can't do that. You can't build a time machine and go back and look at the evolution of every dinosaur and observe whether or not the changes in their genome were the result of natural or sexual selection. Nor can you, at this point anyways, travel throughout the entire universe and observe every instance of relativity and definitively say that yes, this is what's really going on. Really, theories are in some sense unprovable because they are simply too expansive. But that doesn't mean they're wrong. It just simply means that there are some things that we can know without necessarily having to prove it. It's simply inescapably logical, right? Where you look at a theory, you look at a hypothesis, and if it does the best job of explaining what it is you're observing, then it's really the most compelling hypothesis, and it's the one you should go with. And that's really exactly what we're presenting in Enlighten University with our educational programs, right? The students who employ themselves in this program, they're being introduced to a understanding of religion that really is so exhaustive and so expansive and covers so much of what we see and observe that individuals who complete this course will really be left with little confusion, doubt, or mystery. Well, there will be plenty of mystery, but it won't be as a result of their confusion, right? They'll ultimately observe and understand that religion does make sense. And that's really one of the most powerful things that we're doing here in Enlighten University, is we're talking about ideas that ultimately make sense out of religion. For me, myself, I was not willing to just accept this idea that there is or isn't an afterlife. I wasn't willing to just follow blindly in faith the skeptics or the religious believers. I needed to know, and I thought to myself, if I can know the position of an Andromeda galaxy, if I can know the size of a bacteria, if I can know all of these things with the help of science, there's simply no excuse for why I can't know what it is that happens to an individual when they die. And it took me 15 years of hard work, research, and self-sacrifice to ultimately glean these ideas from the various religions of the world. And so the curriculum and the content that I present here at Enlighten University is ultimately the result of all that hard work and research. And that's really what I'm here to share with you guys. So if you spent your life asking yourself, is there a God? Is there a afterlife? And how can I really know? I would really consider, joining our programs and having a look at the content that we're teaching. We're about 50 students strong, and the programs just keep expanding. And so, we're really building up a community there. And this summer, actually, I've invited the students to attend a Sundance celebration here in southern Alberta, hosted hosted by Morris Crow at the Kainai Nation, and I'm really excited to do that. We're really getting involved with the community, and we're going to see this thing expand and grow. But ultimately, you know, I do hope that these ideas will get out there and that more people will see that religion is not nonsense. Spirituality is not beyond our understanding. It is difficult to understand, and it is very complicated. Hence, there are so many lectures in this program. But ultimately, you know, understanding chemistry is no different at all. I mean, if you really want to be a doctor, then you're going to have to go to school for 7 years, right? And so I really hope that the kinds of content that we're producing, you know, the education that we're providing is going to create experts. It's going to create people who are professionals, who understand religion and spirituality, and who can ultimately go out there and really help and benefit others. And so if you guys are new to the channel, I would really encourage you to hit that subscribe button. Those likes, they always help the YouTube algorithm. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.